Hello everyone. Welcome to another exciting Eventide Tuesday night patrons only stream. I am Jason Bowman. I'm the creator of Eventide and a little game called Pathfinder. How is everyone doing here this fine evening? I see there's a handful of folks hanging out in chat. How's everybody doing? Got a good crowd tonight. Today, I think what we're going to talk about is kind of the second half of the second part of Wolfren's fate. So just like how the first adventure was kind of split into two pieces, the second adventure is also kind of broke into two pieces. One is kind of the investigation, and the other part is the Eventide Festival. The thing is, these two parts, unlike the previous parts, these two parts can occur kind of at the same time. But from a design perspective, I'm kind of building them as two separate pieces. Neither group is to the festival yet. One group is like halfway through the second day leading up to the festival. So they're getting there, right? I'm within a session or two of them hitting it. So my design for this is now in kind of full swing. And this is a really important part of this story. It's an important part of the world. It reinforces the kind of lore and story of Eventide. And it provides an interesting change of pace. I love festivals. I love celebrations inside of an RPG. I think it's a great way to show that the world is not static, that the people of this world have more to them than just wake up, go work in field, come home, have dinner with family, go to bed. Sometimes go to local tavern and get in bar fight, right? For the games that I run, having festivals and celebrations is a way to kind of mark the passage of time. It's a way to make the world feel more like a place that is lived in. And the design of these for the setting is very intentional. That's not to say that there aren't kind of rare, random, sporadic religious holy days and things like that, because there are. And while some of those might be important at some points in time, the game really does have kind of two large festivals, celebrations that happen. One is in spring, dealing with kind of the first planting, and is there to kind of wrap up and include a lot of your kind of spring and renewal celebrations. And then there's Eventide. And Eventide is there to kind of sum up most of your fall and harvest celebrations. Because ultimately, right, when I'm designing anything, I want there to be kind of a common lexicon, a common language that everyone in taking part in it intrinsically kind of gets. And to that end, I mean, this is pretty cultural, but I am kind of aiming this at, some pretty broadly accepted, understood, at least American holidays. Some of them have broader sense than that. Not all, but, the concept of a harvest festival, the concept of a day of remembrance, and although pretty uniquely American, the concept of Halloween are things that I find very engaging. And wrapping those all together into one massive festival is a great way to kind of set aside a portion of the campaign to do something kind of different. So that's why I decided to set Wolfren's fate right before the events of the Eventide Festival. That way it would encapsulate this festival and allow it to be kind of a showcase point for this adventure and for the story as a whole. So let's talk about it. Let's investigate the Eventide Festival. Let's talk about what it is, where its origins are, and kind of how those morphed into the festival today. Because I think all of this is going to play into the adventure. So what I want to do first is kind of talk about the construct, the artificial thing that is this celebration, and then I'll come back and kind of talk about how this will play in to the events of the adventure. So buckle in. We're going to talk festival. So I do think, first of all, backing up, as I said, there's two festivals. One is the spring festival in the Eventide setting, and that one's like 7 days long. It's like the planting festival. That's important to the world and is a good cultural piece, but it doesn't carry the lore implications that the Eventide Festival does. Which is why I think this is a particularly important one. And frankly, for cultures around the world, yeah, it mentioned from chat, a spring festival and a harvest festival are pretty universal. That period of time where you do the initial plantings and you get out of the long winter and everybody needs a party, pretty universal. The concept of the harvest is now done. This is the last moments of true plenty before you have to kind of tuck it in and be careful to make it through the winter is another moment of celebration that's pretty universal. But in this case, it also is tied back to the events of Eventide. So, the year is 276 TD. The sky goes dark for 3 weeks. During this period of time, depending on where you are, terrible things happen. In the northern climates, it gets really cold. There's bitter winters that settle in almost immediately because it happens pretty late in the year. And in other parts of the country or in the world, order breaks down, chaos ensues, people think it's the end of the world. It's a pretty dark time, but when the sun does finally come back, people celebrate. But there are those who realize that this is something terrible, that who knows why it happened. No one had answers. And would it happen again? And, frankly, for a lot of folks, especially in that generation, the people who lived through Eventide and made it through the other side, it was a traumatic event. The sun didn't rise for 3 weeks. They lost most of the harvest. That winter was incredibly harsh, and they lost more people. Everyone suffered. No matter where you were, you suffered. And when it was over, no one had answers. The world just carried on. But over the years following, the survivors started marking that time period. And before that, there were these extra days floating in the year that were attached to months. Folks generally moved some of the days around because it didn't really matter. And created this festival. I'm going to go ahead and say that probably Zankar had a lot to do with codifying the calendar, because everyone had their own local calendars for the longest periods of time, but Zankar, by and large, being as large as it is, has kind of codified the calendar, much in the way that larger empires have codified dates and times and all that kind of stuff over the years in our world. So when this all happened, and in the years after that, people began to mark it. They began to note when it happened and, what actually, occurred. And they started having, at first, just a remembrance. So the entire thing eventually, morphed into a remembrance and a harvest festival and kind of glommed together a number of concepts. So today, as it has evolved over time, it's evolved into a festival that is now kind of 3 distinct days. And these days occur between Navram and Octran and Navram, the 2 months, right? So it's outside their calendars. And each one has a special kind of title and celebrations to go with it. So this is what the players are about to experience, this 3-day festival. And it starts out, the very first day is called Darkest Night. In Darkest Night, the celebration does not begin until the sun sets. And as it does, everyone in town extinguishes all of their lights. All of the lights on all the buildings are extinguished. Anyone who has, ever-burning flames or whatnot, they cover those up. They black those out. And the entire countryside and town goes dark. And anyone who goes out can only go out with candlelight. They can walk around with a candle. But what happens is the folks dress in outlandish costumes. And some go as ghosts and specters. Others go as folks, common folks who perished all those years ago. Monsters and ghouls. It's evolved over time to just be a kind of generic costume party. People invent themes and things of that nature. And they go from place to place and ask for shelter. Because that's what people did in Eventide. If they didn't have a place to go, no one wanted to stay out in the dark. They wanted to huddle around what light there was. So people go around on the night of Eventide and ask for a little light, a little shelter. And if the place is having a party, they let folks in and you come in and you enjoy the celebrations, you have some drinks, you talk with people. It's a party. But if they do not, if they're not having a party, they're expected to give you a token of aid and tell you to move on. So in this way, it kind of serves as a trick-or-treat sort of thing. If you go to a place, they either offer you shelter or aid. And if they offer you shelter, it's a party, and you get to go inside and enjoy the party and enjoy the festivities. If it's aid, then they give you some token and wish you well to find the light. So in this way, folks will kind of crawl around their neighborhood collecting treats and tokens of aid before they finally find a party where they settle in for a while, and maybe sometime later they'll leave and continue the crawl. And oftentimes places will note that they are going to have a celebration. That way folks know where the parties are. Other times you just stumble upon them. You might realize that your neighbors were holding a secret kind of festival and get together, and you get to attend. So it's kind of it's more of an adult version of Halloween. That doesn't mean that there aren't children who do it as well. And, there are parties, but this is a more raucous celebration. And initially, this wasn't a celebration at all. It was, kind of a solemn event. But Darkest Night really is there to serve as Halloween, right? Dress up in costumes, go out in the spooky dark night, and look for treats and parties. And that festival technically does not begin until that evening. So that day is not a day of work or labor for most folks. They're usually preparing for the party, preparing their costumes, preparing their home for a party or whatnot, preparing treats. Most treats are food related, generally speaking. Although most places will also have candles that you can take if your candle is going out. So that's Darkest Night. And Darkest Night is really just kind of, as I said, a big party. The second day is called First Ray, and it is to commemorate the very first shafts of light that were seen by the people after 3 weeks of darkness. So it's not like it got light all at once, right? There were just faint shafts of light that would break through the clouds now and again. Over several days. So Eventide, who gives out full-size Snickers? That's good. It's important. It's important. I've been that house that gives out the full-size candy bars. It makes you very, very, very popular. You get a legend around you in the neighborhood if you're the house who gives out full-size. Anyway, First Ray is to commemorate those first rays of light that would hit communities. Now, this also is the day of commemoration, the day of kind of sorrow. And it is that because it is the moment where the light first started coming back and people realized the horror of what had happened, the number of people who died. The number of places that were destroyed, that burned down in the darkness and no one even knew. The places that, where all of the people took their own lives, or, it's a grim moment. It's not, you would think that they might celebrate, but in fact, those first rays of light revealed the horror of what Eventide was. So as a result, this day has become the day of kind of remembrance. And the way it works, at least in my head right now, because some of this is stuff I'm making up for the first time right now. That's one thing of note about all of this material, is that some of this is stuff I'm literally inventing. I knew this festival existed, but I didn't know how people celebrated it. So this adventure is kind of defining some of that. So it is one of those things where whenever I'm talking about this stuff, I'm reminded of the fact that I'm writing an adventure, but I'm using this adventure to help me develop the world. So it's like weird world building, adventure development. It's a lot of things mixed into one. So that led me to, okay, so this is the moment where they commemorate those who have died. And in the beginning, it was to commemorate those who died in Eventide. But over the years, folks added other people's names to it, right? You know, people who had died recently. And over the centuries, it is turned into the day of remembrance for all those who have died in the past year, generally. Some people will remember someone for years and years and years. But, you know, that's your choice. But generally speaking, it is considered, you know, you are helping that person get to rest by commemorating them on first Ray. And the way it works during the celebration is, as the sun sets, everybody gathers, right? And they don't all gather in one spot. They gather at their front doors, and some folks will gather and form a parade. And this parade is usually dignitaries and religious folks, and you know, like high priests. And the parade will make its way through town carrying a hooded lantern. And by hooded, I mean it is closed except for a thin slat that is open, so it just releases a beam of light. And as the sun is set and everything is dark, this parade, and everyone else in the parade has candles, but the only real light at the head of it is this lantern. And the whoever is leading the parade that year will make their way through town, and as they go to each place, they will shine the lantern at the door. And anyone who has lost someone stands at the door holding usually either a placard or a candle, and they will call out the person's name who has departed. And the light will shine across their name. They don't have the bodies there or anything like that. But what they do is they use that light to be that they have been found now after the darkness, and their lives are being commemorated. So this parade will wind its way through the entire town and will take hours. Wormbone is not a particularly huge place, but it is big enough that the parade takes several hours to wind its way through the entirety of town. And it, you know, it only goes through major thoroughfares, but, you know, that does allow it to hit all the houses and all that stuff. So, First Ray is just that. It's a solemn festival. It's not a party. There are many folks who will go and kind of drink their sorrows away at the end of the day. But it, you know, is a moment of remembrance. I have a question here of, is it the same lantern bearer, or does it change each year? I think it probably changes each year. I think in some communities it's the same. In some places, larger places, it probably changes each year. You know, I think there's some room for customization there. In Wormbone, I'm certainly going to have it change each year, based on, you know, the major religious houses. In fact, that might make for an interesting point of contention between the Church of Valanav and the Church of Astramari. There may be something there that I can play with to kind of amp the tension between those two faiths. You know, or maybe they're both being screwed and the Church of Silara has it this year. I don't know. We'll figure it out. But I do intend to have it be a role that changes every year and becomes a point of note. So there is that. So then comes the third day. And the third day is called Pale Dawn. And Pale Dawn is kind of a large festival. This is more of like a carnival. So whereas Darkest Night is kind of a raucous party, filled with spooks and terrors, First Ray is a solemn remembrance ceremony, and Pale Dawn is kind of more that it is a kind of more traditional harvest festival, in that there is a big feast. It's much more family friendly than the parties of Darkest Night, and it has food and drink and giant community tables filled with plenty, and folks are giving thanks for the return of the light. And this happens throughout the midday into the afternoon. The previous two take place at night, but this, Pale Dawn, specifically takes place during the day. And I think there's probably harvest games and things like that I think I will probably incorporate into the adventure to give the PCs a chance to do some fun harvest game kind of things where they might be able to win some prizes, maybe some money or magic items or things like that. Or, I don't know, something fun. And the entire festival closes as the sun sets that day. So as the sun sets on the final third day, generally speaking, folks are meant to have finished up their meals by this point in time. And everyone, raises a toast, raises a glass, as there are recitations of a poem meant to keep the darkness at bay and beckon the sun to return again. So this is how they kind of close up the ceremony, and symbolize kind of, hope and renewal and the return of light. Because, right, after the sun finally did return after Eventide, people were afraid the first time it set again that it wouldn't come back again, right? So, yeah, I think, I got a question here is it so old of an event where most of the ancestries, except for the elves, really not have sorrows greater than great-great-grandfathers, or do I misunderstand timeline? So, to understand the timeline, Eventide happened in 1276. The current year is 1122. So it has been, about 850 years since Eventide. There are, I believe, no elves. There's no one left alive who experienced Eventide. Eventide, the last folks who would have witnessed it, were elven children at the time, and they died a few hundred years ago. So unless there are other very, very old-lived species, if there are any dragons left in the world, some of them certainly could have remembered those days. But the elves, even the elves, don't remember anymore. So, so in the case of the elves, there will certainly be people alive whose parents lived through Eventide. So they have like secondhand stories, and there very well could be folks whose grandparents died in Eventide, but I think that's about as far as it goes. For humans, it's been, dozens of generations, and frankly, a lot of these celebrations are organized by humans. So, they're the ones who are kind of the prime drivers here. So, obligatory bobbing for apples. Yes, the Pale Dawn Festival undoubtedly has bobbing for apples. That is a mandatory component of any harvest festival, of some sort, right? Probably some other weird things as well. So yeah, there is the festival itself, and it's a 3-day thing, and when it's over, life kind of continues. But generally speaking, the date of this festival being at the end of the October analog of the time of year means that the harvest really is over at this point in time, and in many cases has been over for several weeks. But I do think that it does serve as a moment of saying, all right, after this is winter, right? After this is we're getting close to the cold winter months, especially up here in the north. The last 2 months of the year, the Icegar Valley is pretty snowbound for, at least 4 months of the year. Starting in Navram, sometimes in Octrin, right? Wormbone is so far north that, frankly, its Eventide oftentimes has snow. In the setting of Wolfren's Fate, it does not. But snow may begin to fall shortly thereafter or very nearby. It's very cold, but it's not quite snowbound just yet. So that's the festival itself, and that is designed to happen entirely during the events of this part of the adventure. And they've got the investigation going, and frankly, it is nigh unto impossible to actually solve the investigation in 2 days. Now, I think groups that are super diligent about it may be able to solve it before the end of the Eventide Festival. So they may know where Wolfren's Ring is, or at least have a very solid clue of where they need to go next. But the events that happen during the Eventide Festival will prevent them from leaving until these events are resolved. And that gets me to kind of what their arc is through this. So that my players are going to experience this, obviously, as the adventure unfolds. And in fact, many of them are getting pretty close to it. They're on the final day of Octran, and then comes, the first day of the Eventide Festival, which is Darkest Night. The morning and day of Darkest Night isn't really anything special. It's usually folks getting ready for the parties and festivals for the days to come. So they will be able to do some investigation then, but some of the businesses are going to be closed. It's going to be harder to get access to some elements that they need to investigate. I still think the adventure, this is something I need to include in the adventure, it'll probably be an appendix, is a schedule of businesses and when they are open, so that the players can coordinate and figure out when they need to go to places. And some things are open all the time, right? If you're going to go visit Jaratha, the elf you're trying to find, she's always home, right? But, if you're trying to go to the Teetering Tower, it's only open for so and so many hours per day. So some of these things will be kind of eliminated by timing and whatnot. But by the time Darkest Night rolls around, the players should be closing in on the final solution. They just may not get there before this celebration. Especially if they decide to spend time to figure out their own costumes, because that is part of the adventure, right? Is having your own costume. Now, in the lead up to this, a couple of key things happen. First, they get this message from the Dawnbringers to go and meet them. And when they go talk to the Dawnbringers, they learn that, they're trying to illuminate the truth about Eventide and what happened 800 years ago. And there are those who wish to stop them, and that they need to keep an eye out because, there are dangerous things afoot. Then at the same time, someone somewhere takes a bounty out on them, and they get attacked on the end of that first night by some brutes in an alley who have a job card from a mysterious place, with their descriptions on it, and a call to, go rough them up and rob them with a promise of pay. So things start turning bad pretty quickly, but they don't get dramatically bad until Darkest Night. So on Darkest Night, the players can go out and celebrate. That is part of the adventure, is that they can go and take part in the Eventide Festival. And as they do so, as they go around, there are going to be a number of kind of vignette scenes that happen. I'm not going to make everyone roleplay going door to door, but there is going to be a bit where they do go door to door and collect a few things. That is definitely part of it. Then there is going to be a moment where they end up at a party and they can have some drinks and have a good time. And then they end up in kind of out on the streets with a whole bunch of folks making their way around. And throughout all this, odd things start happening, because in and amongst the revelers are some gaunts. And these gaunts are hunting the player characters because they know no one will notice them during this. And they are going to use this as an attempt to lure the PCs into a dark alley where they can attack them. Because the gaunts want to see the PC dead. And in fact are the ones who hired the folks through the job board at the Belching Blackguard. So there's a secret kind of underground tavern for thieves and cutthroats in Wormbone called the Belching Blackguard. And in there's a job board for criminal activities. Then you can go take a job and go do it and get paid. And one of them, using disguise, went in there and posted this job to attack the PCs, because they're willing to use whatever tools they can to defeat and stop anyone from investigating Wolfren. So that night is actually a very dangerous, deadly battle in the darkness, dealing with Gaunt for the first time. And this fight is going to be scary. It's going to, the whole thing. I'm hoping to set it up in such a way that it plays out kind of like a horror movie, right? That there's someone in the crowds watching them, and they can't put their finger on it. They don't know who it is, and every time they think they see somebody, when they look back, they're gone. And for those of you who saw, I did a stream a little while back about hammering out some of the stats and abilities for the Gaunt. I'm getting close to being finished on that. We're not there yet, but I'm getting close. And I'm pretty excited about it because they are going to be pretty terrifying monsters. Lots of little tricks to kind of make them pop on the page, as it were. So that's what happens in Darkest Night. So those are the events of that, but ultimately those events, even after they defeat the Gaunts, because they don't, obviously, not assuming that the player characters are going to die that night, as they wrap up that first night, they're left going, what the hell was that? And where is this coming from? What is going on? And the next day, they can go speak with the Dawnbringers again, because the Dawnbringers are the ones who named them Gaunts, by the way. I'm a big fan of the Dawnbringers. Know that there are these creepy individuals stalking them, but they've never really gotten a good look at them, and they've only known to fear them, and they call them Gaunts because everyone who's gotten even a glimpse of them says that they're these tall, gaunt figures. That's how they get their name. And obviously the Dawnbringers are probably going to be one of the first places they visit the next day to be like, the hell was this? We were attacked. And what they don't know is that this is playing directly into the Gaunts' hands, because the Gaunts have been trying to root out the Dawnbreakers as well. So later on that night, during the first ray, the players can join the parade, or they have a lot of different options. I think that for this adventure, the players are going to be asked to join the parade as kind of the local celebs. They will be asked to join the parade and carry a candle, through the town, and be a part of this celebration. They're kind of like local celebrities right now. And when they make their way through, and as the parade makes its way back into Black Arches, it's going to make its way to the Black Thumb, which is the headquarters of the Dawnbringers, and it's going to be trashed. And that's when they're going to realize that the Gaunts have struck again. And so this is the trigger that leads into the finale of this kind of adventure. Kind of. The way it works is they, that night, they quickly come to realize that the Gaunts have struck again, and that their contact in the Dawnbringers is missing, and the Gaunts have left a note beckoning the PCs to walk into what is an obvious trap, where they can deal with them once and for all. Now, the Gaunts think they're going to win this. Unfortunately for them, PCs are resourceful and powerful. So basically, this is a lure to get the PCs down into the Gaunts sewer base, which leads to the finale of the adventure. Now, that happens between the second and the third day. That's very intentional as well. Because what I want to have happen is the players go, get ready, get their stuff together, head down into the sewers to deal with the Gaunts, which is a journey that's going to take them many hours, because they got to wind their way through the sewers. They need to go get their stuff. They need to make their way down there. Then they need to make their way all the way back out once they deal with the Gaunts and battle them, and then survive. And the final bit is going to be another designed to be in one day, one series of encounters, no resting. Fight your way through the Gaunt sewer hideout and deal with this menace once and for all. The goal of this being is that the PCs emerge from the sewers just as the Pale Dawn Harvest Festival is kicking off, and they come up out of the sewers covered in muck, covered in grime, having saved someone, and the aghast moment of, people having a harvest festival and the players being a bedraggled, sewer-ridden mess, and all of the after effects of that. That way, the festival itself becomes kind of the closing scenes of part 2. Because by this point in time, they should know where Wolfren's ring is, because they will have had 4 days at this point to investigate it and figure it out. And if not, they can always continue the investigation the next day and probably solve it almost. So, yeah, the Gaunts get their monologue moment, and from there it's all over for them. But I mean, that gets into the Gaunt base thing, and I've got a few surprises in there as well that I'm looking forward to springing, not just on my poor unsuspecting players, but on all of you as well. So, suffice to say, the Gaunt base is going to be interesting and add to the lore of the world. But I'm not quite ready to reveal it yet, because there's a few ideas in there that are still a little half-baked that I'm chewing on to decide what direction I'm going to go. But that is how it's all going to play out, right? Obviously players will interfere and muck with this in the way that they want to muck with it. But, I do think, letting them do Darkest Night on kind of their own pitch is great, because that allows the kind of setup and payoff of this Gaunt attack to be what it needs to be. And I might even do the sort of thing where I'm contemplating, the Gaunts have some spellcasting ability, I think, especially when it comes to kind of shadows and illusion. I think what I may do is try and lure the players into somewhere dark and dangerous there during that Darkest Night. There's something there that I think I can play with. I'm still kind of working out some of the details. It may be that they get invited into a party that isn't a party at all, that is in fact the Gaunt trap. That's a possibility. Or alternatively, they get lured somewhere because someone else is in danger, but that is actually an illusion just designed to get the PCs out of the crowds. And then, honestly, the other major point is getting them actually in the parade. Because I think it's pretty easy to lure PCs into a kind of position of prestige, especially when they've started to get contacts with the Dawnbringers, which brings them into contact, realizing that Havanok is one of them and that they have someone on the guards who is on their side. And all of a sudden, it all comes kind of clicking together. Now, this is also going to tie into the politics of the city, because I think House Trevere is going to want them there, because Randolin Trevere is trying to butter up the PCs because he's trying to improve his image with the common folk. Let's see. I got a question here. Have I built any contingency plans or methods for restoring a character to life? 4-player party is a bit thin. 3 players makes it really tough, though. How will you handle death? In this setting, in the adventure itself, honestly, I don't think it's too hard to replace a character, but probably between pieces. I haven't included advice for that yet. I will probably do so once I collect all 4 parts into one kind of mega adventure. Then I think that's probably the right place to say adding characters at various points. Right now, like if you had to, let's say a character died in part 1 to the Shadow Hunter, getting into part 2, it's not too hard to see that the guards realize that this is a really dangerous problem and brings in, a skilled freelancer to help guide the party, or a guard decides to join the party, or, another friend decides to join the party, or, the Dawnbringers insert another agent. There's a lot of different ways you can go. And that's going to continue between each major part. Now, that said, can people come back from the dead in this setting? Yes. However, it is very difficult to do. In that, it's just hard to find anyone to cast the spells. The town of Wormbone has very few spellcasters in it. That said, if you get to Varnathus, you probably got a better chance. So, it is kind of the thing where, coming back from the dead in this setting is a little tricky and sometimes comes with drawbacks, because the path for souls is not as clean as it once was. Things aren't going great on that front. It still works, but for how long? Unclear. So, that is kind of what I got set up. I think this leads to a good, satisfying conclusion. I think it kind of gives this part a nice, good hammer home, and does a good job of kind of setting up the next stage, which is actually going to go get the ring. I am a little worried, frankly, from a narrative sense, that part 2 doesn't feel satisfactory because you do not get the ring at the end of part 2. That said, I think the parts of the adventure are kind of an artificial distinction that only you and I will understand. From the player's perspective, it's not like, we finished part 2 and we didn't even get the ring, that sucks. For them, they don't know the difference between part 1 and part 2, right? Or part 2 and part 3. It just, that's the flow of the story, now we need to go here. So, I mean, I guess I'm not as concerned about that as I might otherwise be. I feel like as I'm releasing these things as individual adventure pieces, that is a little bit of a challenge. But frankly, once they've come along for parts 1 and 2 of 4, it should be clear that this is going somewhere. So, that said, I'm excited to see it kind of all play out and all come together. I'll be honest, as an update for all of you, I am still waiting on getting part 1 back from my editor, who is very late, and with good reasons, and I don't really want to go into it, but that has been a hold up on my end. And I feel really bad about it, because I want to get it moving and get it done, and I want to get it out to all of you, because, you already have the rough drafts, but this would be a much more polished piece, something much more akin to a finished module. But I gotta keep waiting. And I will keep doing that, because I have faith, but I am worried that it is running a little late right now. Part 2 is coming together very nicely, and I am going to have part 2 to hand over pretty much the moment my editor is done with part 1, which reminds me I need to start ordering art for part 2. So that's probably going to be the next thing that I do, actually, here, is get some art ordered. I need to still finish up the maps. The maps are dragging on me because I just haven't had the time to do them. Work keeps me busy. Yeah, and I do agree. Another comment from chat is that the defeat of the Gaunts does feel like a satisfactory conclusion, and I agree. And that's kind of the point, is that the Gaunts are actually the real thing going on here. The investigation is the side story. You just don't realize it at first, that you're starting with the B plot and the A plot comes landing in your lap. Yeah, and obviously there's going to be treasure and stuff, right? The thing about this is that the investigatory part of this adventure has, well, frankly, next to no reward in it, right? An investigation rarely does until the end. So a lot of the treasure will be coming from the Gaunts and that whole part of the adventure, which is the part that has to happen. So, I think, at the end of this, the players will get rewarded handsomely with some pretty good magic items, which is pretty key. And then that'll lead between the kind of, we'll have a bit of a breakdown between parts 2 and 3 before they go off on their adventure. I think most groups will be waiting on some smithing work to be finished up, because at the end of part 1, right, you get enough kind of a magical quicksilver that you use to enchant items, and there's enough to make 2 +1 items, but the downtime is only long enough to make 1. So you then need the second bit of downtime or another week to make the second one, which takes you kind of through the week of Eventide and into the next week. So both of my groups right now have 2 people that have +1 weapons, and then they're waiting until after part 2 to get the second +1 weapons. But technically that treasure is bundled in part 1 of the adventure. It just takes a little while to get. But that does mean that the Gaunt sewer base can be pretty rich in magic items and treasure. So, yeah, thank you. I've got I appreciate the thoughts. I have been working very hard on this adventure to have it unfold in a way that helps explain the world, right? I think when it comes to building a setting, that introductory adventure is ridiculously critical. I think if it gives a bad experience, that's it. People don't keep playing. So this adventure has to pay off. It has to be kind of what I need it to be. It has to be this kind of big momentous setup for, you know, frankly, a larger world and a larger story. It's got a lot of weight on its shoulders that I need to pay off. And I think it's going to do it, but it does require a lot of work and a lot of playtesting, and frankly, a lot of chats with all of you. I have to admit, these discussions get me to think about this thing in advance, which allows me to cook on it, which allows me to develop it, which means by the time I even playtest it, it's already been iterated on it 3 times. During this discussion alone, I've discussed about 2 or 3 things that evolved during this discussion, because the act of talking about it for me helps me develop it. So in that, thank you. You coming here and listening to me helps me make Eventide happen. And honestly, I couldn't do it without your support. So I want to thank all you for coming by here today. That's all I have here today. We will be meeting this coming Saturday for a Secrets of Eventide stream. That'll be at 3 p.m. I don't know what the subject's going to be yet. I'm gonna think about it. Maybe I'll use Saturday to actually build the sewer encounters. So if you're interested in that, and if you are a Lord or Master level patron, stop by this Saturday, and maybe I'll cook that up live on channel. But that's all I have here tonight, folks. Thank you all for stopping by. Thank you for watching, and thank you most of all for your support. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you next time.